The Vizio H1 OLED is not perfect, but then again, does it have to be? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison, and today I'm reviewing the Vizio H1 OLED, a TV that is seriously undercutting its competition in terms of price, which begs the question, does that mean there will be trade-offs? Well, spoiler alert, yes, there are a few trade-offs, but how severe are they? And does the fact that this TV comes in so much less expensive than its competition justify those trade-offs? Let's find out. Let's start with picture quality, because that's everybody's favorite part anyway, plus I think it's one of the most important considerations when buying a TV, and I'll break this down into constituent parts that lead to the whole of picture quality, beginning with black level, which, as you can tell, is very impressive. It's an OLED TV, so when it turns the pixels off, you get true black. But that's not the whole story with blacks. You also need to have good gradients leading into dark grays and then slightly brighter grays, shadow detail, basically, right? And that's one of the areas where this TV struggles a little bit. When you watch very dark scenes, dark movies, it's dark to the point where if you don't have all the lights shut off and maybe have the blinds down, you may have trouble seeing the image. And I don't just mean like the small little details in the shadows. I mean, you're gonna have trouble seeing the image in general. It doesn't like to come out of black very smoothly, and so you have a little bit lack of shadow detail and tough time watching really, really dark scenes. This is fine if you're in a very dark room, but if it's well lit, you may struggle a little. Next thing I want to talk about is brightness on the opposite side of the black levels. The interesting thing about this television is that the out-of-box calibrated picture preset doesn't actually allow the TV to get that bright. I was measuring around 400 nits peak in HDR and around 300, just shy of 300 in SDR. That's not a huge difference between SDR and HDR, and frankly, that's really not enough for HDR. But the interesting thing about this TV is that it's got a couple of different settings which dramatically influence how bright the TV can get. Let me show you those. We're playing some SDR content here, and if we go into the picture settings, you'll notice that we're in calibrated, but down 2 clicks is a luminance setting, and by default, this is set at 60. So that's when I was getting, like I said, the 400 nits peak brightness. So I went ahead and tried turning this up to 100 to max out the luminance. And then if you go a little bit further down into advanced picture settings, there is a peak luminance setting with a low, medium, and high option. I went ahead and juiced that up to high, and with that, I was able to get something closer to 400 nits in SDR. And then when we went into the HDR mode, I was getting something closer to 650 nits for peak specular highlights. So I found this whole process interesting. Basically, Vizio has a different approach to its picture settings than I'm used to with other manufacturers. When you go into HDR, that luminance dial is gone. You just have the option for low, medium, and high peak luminance. And I suspect that's because the luminance should be maxed out already. However, I got different test results when I raised the luminance level in SDR versus HDR. Weird, but if I was looking for the brightest, punchiest picture with the best HDR highlights, I would definitely recommend going this way. Now, with Dolby Vision content, the TV just seems to do everything right on its own. Dolby Vision calibrated looks great. The only thing you have to do is turn off the motion smoothing and you're all set. Now, I was a little concerned that messing with the luminance levels like that might have a detrimental effect on color accuracy, but it didn't. And in fact, this TV's out-of-box color is fantastic in the calibrated picture modes. Very accurate out of the box. I was able to dial it in just a little bit better, but for most folks who aren't going to get a calibration, this TV is doing great in the color department. Now, as for motion, this is an area where, unfortunately, I feel like the Vizio could be doing a little bit better. It definitely struggles with motion blur, as you can see in the turbines here. The blades are a little bit blurry. And we also noticed some judder in 24 frame per second content. Less of an issue in 30 FPS and 60 FPS. However, it was enough to bother me when I was watching it. Now, keep in mind, I turned the motion blur reduction and judder reduction all the way down because I'm very sensitive to soap opera effect. You might not be so sensitive. So with those at 2, which is, by the way, the default in the calibrated mode here, you don't get as much blur or judder. But if you're super sensitive like me, the trade-off is you're gonna see some of that motion blur and judder. Outside of those core components of picture quality consideration, you have other elements that are tied directly to the TV's picture processing chip. And this is an area where I feel like Vizio has a little bit of room to grow. It's just not as clean an image as you get from, say, an LG OLED or Sony OLED. I noticed this when watching low resolution content. There were more jagged edges. And when I watched lower bit depth content, when I was streaming low resolution stuff, or it was just a highly compressed image, there was a lot more macro blocking in big swaths of color. Also, we noticed a little bit of a moire effect with really tight patterns. Anytime you have buildings with very close straight lines, it tends to ring a little bit. So overall, it's certainly not a bad processor by any means. It's still very good. It's just not at the elite level of some of Vizio's competition. And it wouldn't be an OLED TV review unless we talked a little bit about burn-in potential. I've said this before, burn-in is not a real problem for most people. If it was, we'd be seeing rampant return rates, and that's simply not happening. There are scenarios, however, if you drive the TV really hard, where burn-in is possible. So if you're the sort of person that plays the same content or the same game for 6 hours a day or more, every single day, nonstop, then it's going to be an issue. I like to talk about folks who like to put on a news channel like CNN or Fox News, and they watch it all day, like 8 to 10 hours a day. That's the only thing on the TV. After a few months, yep, you're going to have burn-in for sure. That ticker down at the bottom, it never changes, and that's an issue. With that said, the TV does a lot to try to combat burn-in. In fact, almost to an annoying level. If you're at a still screen, you're not watching content, but maybe just sitting at the Netflix screen checking out different pieces of content, if you don't touch that remote after like 30 seconds, the screen goes completely dark. It also has a pixel shifting technology to help kind of avoid any potential burn-in. Now, while testing this TV, there was some temporary image retention, but it went away very, very fast. That's when I put a really bright white window right smack in the center of the screen and left it there for about 3 or 4 minutes. Ultimately, I was able to see that in a gray screen, but only for a short period of time. Ultimately, it disappeared. And that's again because this TV has things like an automatic brightness limiter to try and combat the potential for burn-in. So if you're the sort of person who really uses their TV all day long using the same kind of content, then maybe look at an LED LCD television. For most of you though, even gamers, I still think OLED is the best way to go for picture quality. Next, I want to talk about audio quality. And it's very simple. It's bad. It's not good on this TV at all. I don't think I would even use the built-in speakers. I would have to have some kind of soundbar. Fortunately, Vizio makes the most affordable, high-performance soundbars you can buy. So when you're looking at the price of this TV, consider that you're going to need to spend at least $100, maybe a little bit more would be a good idea, to get a good quality audio experience out of this television. Now is the part where I would love to be talking to you about the PlayStation 5 and gaming capabilities with the Vizio H1 OLED, but we're gonna have to skip that for right now. When we plugged in the PlayStation 5, what I expected was a fairly automated experience, and it looked like that at first. It automatically recognized the name of the console and labeled the input. And then the PlayStation booted up and it did come on screen. But what I noticed was that it looked washed out. So I looked into it a little bit further. It turns out we weren't getting HDR, which is what the PS5 does by default. Started tinkering around with various different settings, and wouldn't you know it, we managed to brick the whole thing. Now there is a workaround where you can go into the PlayStation 5 in safe mode and change the video settings manually. You want to go to -1 for the video frame delivery rate, and that's going to knock it from 444 chroma to 422 chroma. When you do that, you get 4K, HDR, and up to 120 Hz capability, which is great. But because this situation is not at all like what I thought it was going to be, I'm going to give Vizio an opportunity to talk to me about this and possibly explain what might be going on, explain if there's a fix coming. So don't worry, we're going to dig deep with the PlayStation 5 on the Vizio OLED in our next video. So where do we land with the Vizio H1 OLED? Well, at its foundation, it's an OLED TV, which is a great place to start. Deep, inky blacks, great spectral highlights for an OLED, and also really great color right out of the box. The TV does a lot of things very well, and to the average Joe, you sit down in front of this thing and it looks spectacular. It isn't until you start digging really deep, and I'm talking about TV enthusiast level deep, that you start exposing some of its shortcomings. Those shortcomings are not a huge deal. Any one of them on their own is certainly not a big deal. You add them all together, and then you might have a TV that a video enthusiast might want to pay a little bit more to get a little bit better. For most folks though, the Vizio OLED I think is an outstanding opportunity to get into the premium picture quality that LED LCD TVs just can't produce at a much lower price than ever before. Thanks as always for watching, everyone. What do you think about the Vizio H1 OLED? Does it deliver the goods for the price it's asking? Leave me a comment down below, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and here's 2 other videos I'm sure you're gonna like.